Hey everyone, it's Sevy, and welcome to my Clorinde guide where we'll be covering her kit and talents, constellations, best artifact and weapon builds, team synergies, gameplay tips, and more to help you discover this champion duelist's full potential. Let's begin.
My blade will lead us through the shadows.
Clorinde is a 5-star Electro on-field DPS that uses the Bond of Life mechanic to manipulate her damage. Let's see how her talents work together to achieve this. Casting her skill makes her enter the Night Vigil state. During this state, her normal attacks are transformed into the Swift Hunt pistol attacks that are now infused with Electro and can't be overridden by other elements. On the other hand, her skill cast is transformed into the Impale the Knight, an Electro lunge attack. This lunging attack will also be considered as normal attack damage, so normal attack type bonuses will affect it. Her pistol and lunge attacks compose most of her kit's damage, and they are considered as normal attack damage, but the base multipliers and scalings come from her skill talent level, not the normal attack talent level. Her default normal attack talent deals physical damage and isn't relevant to her core gameplay. Anyway, these Electro-infused attacks now activate her own Bond of Life mechanics. She uses it to enhance her damage, which forms the core of her kit. When her Bond of Life is less than 100%, using her normal attack will grant Bond of Life value equal to 35% of her max HP, during which the base multiplier is also stronger, and they can pierce through enemies to hit multiple targets. You'll use her pistol attacks to stack up her Bond of Life up to 100%, which is when the Bond of Life bar reaches half of her HP bar. Once it's 100%, they become weaker and stop giving Bond of Life, which is where her lunge attack comes in. The skill attack becomes stronger with Bond of Life and reaches its full power when Clorinde has 100% Bond of Life. She does a forward lunge attack and heals herself based on 110% of her Bond of Life. When we combo these two attacks, we can see that it takes 3 normal attacks by default to get to 105% Bond of Life. Then you'll use her skill attack at full power, which also fully depletes her own Bond of Life. The process is repeated until the Night Vigil state ends. It's a pretty easy combo rhythm to get the hang of, and executing it smoothly feels flashy and fast-paced. Also, her pistol shots have a pretty good range and can make her feel partly like a ranged unit, with her lunge attack closing the gap between her and your enemies. Her lunge attacks also give her a lot of mobility and can be directed with your movement input, so that can help her reposition at your preference. With her skill attacks, she will constantly be healing herself as well. While her fully powered skill's healing value is 110% based on her Bond of Life, this healing will first deplete her Bond of Life, so it's the 10% that will actually count towards healing her own HP. These heals can allow some scenarios where you don't have a dedicated sustained support in the team and Clorinde is self-sustaining. Unfortunately, however, Clorinde gains no interruption resistance increase during Night Vigil. So without shields or interruption effects, be wary of Clorinde getting interrupted while she's executing her attack combos. If that's an issue for you, you'll definitely want a teammate with such defensive utilities. Another important aspect is that healing sources other than her lunge attack cannot heal her while she's in the Night Vigil state. Instead, those heals will be converted into Bond of Life. If a teammate's healing is strong enough, that can speed up your combos to let her use the full lunge attack sooner. It can also make her Bond of Life go way past 100%, which will then make her self-healing more potent. Her Night Vigil duration lasts for only 7.5 seconds, and the duration is relatively shorter than the damage dealing window of most on-field DPS units. If you're concerned with optimizing team rotation times, you can work around this by using teams and teammates that can accommodate faster rotations, or just adjust your rotation to avoid awkward downtimes. Clorinde's flashy burst makes her deal 5 instances of AoE electro damage. These hits follow standard ICDs, so 2 of them can apply electro and trigger reactions, most notably aggravate. Additionally, the burst gives her Bond of Life, which is helpful to kickstart her attack combos. At talent level 7, it now gives more than 100%, which allows her to use her max lunge attack right after activating the Night Vigil state. The Bond of Life gained will also remain even if you switch her out, so her rotation will be as such. You can start by casting her burst, dealing damage, and preparing her Bond of Life. It can either be the case that you first switch to other teammates after her burst, so you can set up their abilities and buffs before her skill, or you can set up other teammates before her burst so that she bursts and goes straight to her skill to enter the Night Vigil state. Alternatively, if her burst is not ready, it's perfectly fine to just skip it for now and just save it for the next rotation. You don't want to burst while her Night Vigil is active to not waste its uptime. After you activate her Night Night Vigil, depending if you used her burst or not, you can either do a max lunge attack right away or use pistol attacks to get 100% Bond of Life first. Then just do her normal attack skill combos until the Night Vigil state expires. If you have a strong enough source of healing, then that can affect your combo by making her reach 100% Bond of Life and lunge attack sooner. However, keeping track can be a hassle, so you can just stick to the standard N3 skill combo for easier muscle memory. Furthermore, her Ascension Passives play a big role in increasing her damage potential. With Clorinde's Ascension 1 passive, when a party member triggers an Electro-related reaction on an enemy, that will buff Clorinde's Electro attacks. Their base damage is increased based on 20% of Clorinde's attack for 15 seconds, and this can stack up to 3 times for up to a 60% attack multiplier increase. The maximum damage increase is 1,800, which caps off at 3,000 attack. That's a significant contribution to her overall damage output, and it also means attack stats have more value until she reaches 3,000 attack. Then for her Ascension 4 passive, if Clorinde's Bond of Life hits at least 100%, her crit rate will increase by 10% for 15 seconds whenever her Bond of Life value changes, and it can max out at 2 stacks. With just proper combos, that's a free 20% crit rate. While this makes balancing her crit ratio easier, there's also a bit more risk of overcapping on crit rate, particularly when using big crit rate buffing equipment. Additionally, her previous 80% healing to Bond of Life conversion from other sources now becomes 100%, which is simply a 1:1 healing to Bond of Life conversion ratio. When leveling her talents, prioritize her skill talent level, as both her pistol and lunge attacks multipliers come from this. Next is her burst, which increases its damage and Bond of Life granted. Then there's no need to level up her normal attack talent. As for her Ascension materials, collect Lumitoiles, Electro Seahorse Boss Mats, and Transoceanic Pearls. Then her talent materials will want the Justice series, more Transoceanic Pearls, and the Ever Amber drop from the Apep's Guardian weekly domain. When it comes to Clorinde's Constellations, they mainly just increase her damage potential plus extra defensive aspects. C1 adds 2 Electro attack instances when Clorinde's normal attacks hit opponents while in her Night Vigil state. Each hit is based on 30% of Clorinde's attack, has a 1.2 second cooldown, and is also considered as normal attack damage. More importantly, this will trigger extra aggravate reactions, giving it more potency in aggravate-based teams. Overall, C1 is a really good bump in damage. It can be a greater DPS increase over her signature weapon if you already have one of her top recommended 5-star alternatives. If you really like her, it's a very good early stopping point for damage. C2 buffs her A1 passive so that it can now add up to 90% of her attack as base damage for her normal attacks and burst, with its limit now increased to 2,700 base damage. This still caps at 3,000 attack stat. Additionally, when this gets fully stacked, she finally gets some innate interruption resistance. This can serve as your hard stopping point for early constellations if you don't want to commit to C6. C3 increases her skill level by 3. C4 buffs Clorinde's burst based on her Bond of Life percentage, going up to a 200% damage bonus, basically letting her burst hit much harder. C5 increases her burst level by 3, and C6 increases Clorinde's crit rate and crit damage by 10% and 70% respectively for 12 seconds after she enters her Night Vigil state. Additionally, she summons a Glimbright Shade to deal a big Electro normal attack damage instance when an enemy is about to attack Clorinde and or when she does her max lunge attack. This can be triggered up to 6 times within one Night Vigil state. The damage Clorinde receives is also reduced by 80%, and her interruption resistance is further increased. Essentially, this just makes her deal more damage and become a tank herself, making C6 a supercharged final constellation. Now let's go over her build, starting with artifact stats. For her sands, attack percent is generally preferable and universally applicable for her teams. An EM piece is a possible alternative only when she's on an aggravate or quick bloom team. With her goblet, go for electro damage bonus. An attack goblet is viable if it doesn't make her exceed the 3,000 threshold and or if she's stacking a lot of damage bonuses already. And for the circlet, get crit rate or crit damage, whatever balances your crit ratio best. For substats, get crit, attack, EM, and energy recharge needed. Remember that her self-crit rate buff will only appear during combat, and a good target range for her EM will be around 100 to 200. Even without a Sands piece, this is achievable with EM substats or external buffs. And if all you want is a pure Hyperbloom build, then you can simply just get full EM main and substats. For her energy recharge, you can opt to not prioritize building ER since it's not that necessary to use her burst every rotation. But here are some sample targets if you do prefer to. Specific equipment or effects may also incentivize using her burst, like the Mist Splitter or her C4. Moving on, let's look at her artifact set recommendations. The Harmonic Whimsy set is the Bond of Life focus set and synergizes perfectly with Clorinde's kit. While it's technically best in slot in her standard teams, it's likely you don't have a great full set since it was only recently released. The gap can be negligible if you use other recommended sets with better substats. However, if you farmed a really good set already, then definitely use it. For a more accessible alternative, the Gladiator's Finale set pulls through again, just like with Arlecchino. Longtime players likely have great to cracked pieces of this, and you can passively farm it from boss rewards. Some might consider the 4-piece Marechaussee set on her as well for its huge potential crit rate buff. However, there are caveats you'll want to keep in mind. The most important is risking overcapping on crit rate since she already has a lot of innate crit rate, and more so if you're using a crit rate weapon. Then you need HP changing mechanics to activate the 4-piece effect. Relying only on her self-healing procs have a ramp-up time and require her to get damage first, which isn't ideal. The more reliable solution is with a Furina team for her HP drain, which limits the team's flexibility. If you previously farmed a good set already and have the conditions to properly utilize it, then go ahead, but no need to farm it specifically for her. Another set that might be of interest to some is the Thundering Fury set due to its unique skill cooldown reduction effect by having the user trigger Electro-related reactions. Dendro teams are the most recommended where Clorinde can reliably trigger Aggravate and or Hyperbloom. Clorinde can quickly re-enter her Night Vigil state soon after the previous one expires. If you're really considering this, you'll want to be very well versed in doing effective rotations to really enjoy the full benefits of this effect. Consider as well if teammates' buffs and abilities can still be active even throughout Clorinde's second skill. In the sample rotation with the Thundering Fury build, you can refresh Fischl's Oz in between Clorinde's Night Vigil states, and Nahida's and Furina's abilities are still active during Clorinde's second Night Vigil. However, if your team already has a rotation that has no use for shortening Clorinde's cooldown, then this set's unique benefit will also be rendered useless and has nearly the same benefits to a 2-piece Thundering Fury plus 2-piece EM set. Here are other possible sets you might be considering. Some have conditional effects, which makes them more restrictive in terms of teams or gameplay, or aren't worth farming, particularly just for Clorinde. And of course, if you don't have good pieces for a proper full set yet, stick with 2-piece or rainbow combos first that have the right main stats and great substats. Next, let's take a look at Clorinde's recommended weapon options. For free-to-play friendly weapons, Finale of the Deep is her best free and craftable choice. Clorinde naturally triggers its passive, and thanks to her Bond of Life mechanic, she can easily get the max attack bonus. Its attack bonuses help a lot in maxing her A1 passive. Even at R1, it's already very solid and is competitive versus other non-free-to-play 4-stars. Iron Sting, Tokabo Shigure, Ishin, and Blackcliff generally perform worse than Finale of the Deep, but if you have them already and would really rather not craft Finale, then you can use them. Iron Sting and Tokabo Shigure can be used for a Hyperbloom team with their EM substats. You might be considering the Harbinger of Dawn for its big crit buffs above 90% HP, which can be supplemented by her self-heal. Though without a shielder or in really tough fights, consistently maintaining her HP that high can be difficult in practice, so be wary if you can actually effectively utilize its potential. The low base attack is also quite detrimental in non-Dendro teams. For 4-star gacha or paid options, Lion's Roar and Black Sword are the recommended ones. Lion's Roar gives attack and a damage percent bonus against Pyro and Electro affected enemies, which will work consistently in Aggravate, Electrocharged, and Overload teams. The Black Sword gives useful crit rate and normal attack damage bonuses. However, it's a paid battle pass weapon, and I don't recommend chasing after its refinements if you haven't yet. But if you already have high refinements of them anyway, you can just use them instead. Finally, for 5-star gacha options, there's her best in slot, Absolution, which is tailored to work with her Bond of Life mechanic. If you just want the full package and know the weapon banner's risks, it's there to pull for. However, if you've been pulling on weapon banners before, you might already have great to competitive 5-stars already. The Mist Splitter Reforged, Light of Foliar Incision, and Harange Pakufutsu are really good top runner-ups. However, be careful of overcapping her crit rate with crit rate weapons. Finally, let's go over her team comps, synergies, and pointers. Dendro teams are first highly recommended and make great use of her kit, as she can quickly trigger Aggravates with her fast attack combos, and better yet, combine Aggravates with Hyperblooms in a Quick Bloom team. For her Aggravate team, you'll first need an off-field Dendro unit to maintain the Quicken Aura and enable consistent Aggravates. Nahida is highly recommended for a strong Dendro application and her on-field EM buff. She can even become a pseudo-team healer by using Prototype Amber if you want more comfort. comfort. Other Dendro units will work totally fine as well depending on your preference and availability. There are dedicated Dendro sustains like Baiju, Yao Yao, and Kirara if you prefer comfort too. At the very least, you'll have Dendro Traveler or Kole who are both free. It's generally recommended to slot in another Electro unit as well to further maximize aggravates and help battery fellow Electro teammates. Fischl is an extremely good teammate as Clorinde can make Fischl's A4 passive trigger a lot of aggravates, and she gives a lot of Electro particles to effectively battery Clorinde. For alternate off-field Electro DPSs, there's Yaemiko as a solid off-field DPS that thankfully isn't as burst dependent. Beidou is also good at multi-target scenarios and can offer an interruption resistance buff for more comfort, but be mindful of her energy needs. An Anemo equipped with the Vivi set is also highly recommended for shredding the enemy's Electro resistance. The most recommended are Kazuha or Sucrose, who can group enemies and give damage percent or EM buffs respectively. But of course, there are a handful of alternatives you can choose from. Infusing their Anemo abilities with Electro will also let them trigger their own aggravates. Shielders who won't interrupt with a Quicken Aura are also possible if you want defensive comfort. If you add an off-field Hydro unit whose Hydro application is slow enough to not get rid of the Quicken Dendro Aura too easily and generate some Dendro cores over time, that can turn your team into a mix of Quicken and Hyper Bloom reactions, also known as a Quick Bloom team. Here, Clorinde will act as the main aggravate and Hyper Bloom trigger. Farina is an excellent choice for off-field Hydro damage and a big team-wide damage bonus buff, but as always, be ready to deal with her HP drain. Farina's Fanfare also has an incoming healing bonus buff that affects all party members, so that's a big buff for Clorinde's self-healing and also helps with faster Fanfare stacking. Yelan is a good alternative for single target damage and application, and she can give Clorinde a ramping damage bonus buff. If you have C6 Candace, Clorinde can trigger her C6 AoE Hydro application over time and take advantage of Candace's normal attack buff, though Candace herself won't be contributing that much damage. Another potential issue is due to Clorinde zipping around the battlefield. Candace's C6 Hydro application might sometimes fail to apply on the enemy if Clorinde moves too far. To reliably maintain the Dendro Aura, Nahida is best thanks to her strong and self-refreshing Dendro Aura. Having two Dendro applicators will also work, and it activates the EM buff of Dendro Resonance. For a Hyper Bloom team, she just needs fast off-field Dendro/Hydro applicators to constantly generate Dendro cores. The usual strong applicators mentioned before are mostly applicable, plus Xingqiu, who has very fast Hydro application. However, be mindful that Clorinde's pistol shot's piercing effect have a narrow AoE, so they have trouble triggering Dendro cores at the sides. Her lunge attack seems to have a wider AoE and is therefore more reliable with hitting Dendro cores. Clorinde's Electro application uptime can lead to less Hyper Bloom triggers overall than other units with longer Electro application windows. So in non-Dendro based teams, there's the Overload template, which now more likely follows the Chevreuse format with only Pyro Electro teammates. Most of the damage still comes from raw Pyro and Electro damage, but Overload still contributes extra reaction damage and is effective in AoE scenarios since it deals AoE damage. You'll want a Pyro unit who can reapply Pyro reliably and help set up Overload reactions to ensure consistent uptime of the resistance shred debuff of Chevreuse. Overload might be harder versus multiple enemies that can easily get knocked back by Overload explosions. At least Clorinde's lunge attack will help her chase after them, but this won't be a concern versus heavy enemies or those with stagger immunity. Electrocharged or Taser teams can have Clorinde be the on-field DPS and the driver of Electro and Hydro teammates. Despite being an Electrocharged team, this still relies more on raw Hydro/Electro damage rather than reaction damage. An Anemo unit is also highly recommended to shred both Electro and Hydro resistances. And you can go for a mono Electro team with 3 Electro units plus an Anemo unit as the flex slot. That's not only to shred Electro resistance, but also because we still need the Electro swirl reaction to trigger Clorinde's passive. With 3 Electro teammates, that's a lot of Electro particles generated to really help with all of their energy needs and lower ER targets. As a reminder, the templates and synergies discussed are not exhaustive nor definitive. You're encouraged to try out alternatives and learn more recommendations and see what works well for you. And that's it for this Clorinde guide. Let me know in the comments if you pulled or are pulling for her and what you think of her so far. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!